Imagine you are an animal,
Sure.
right? And you are born with this biological upgrade that is just so incredibly powerful. I mean, so fundamentally game-changing that it actually tries to kill your mother during childbirth.
Which is just the ultimate anatomical paradox when you really think about it.
It's a total paradox. You're gifted with this organ that, eventually is going to allow your descendants to split the atom or write symphonies or literally travel to the moon.
Right.
But just getting that organ out of the birth canal requires this insane physiological compromise, one that leaves you utterly helpless, like unable to even hold up your own head for months after you're born.
Yeah, you're basically an external fetus at that point.
Right. And that paradox, that sheer danger and vulnerability of the human brain, that is the exact focal point where our entire reality shifts.
It really is the ultimate evolutionary gamble because that period of extreme vulnerability, it forces an entire species to fundamentally rewrite the rules of its own social existence just to keep its infants alive.
Because you just can't survive that.
Yeah. No, you absolutely cannot survive that kind of biological helplessness without completely overhauling how you relate to your environment and to your predators. But most importantly, how you relate to each other.
And that profound biological overhaul, that exact shift, is what we are tracking down today. So, welcome back to the deep dive.
It's a big one today.
It is a massive one. We are setting out on a very specific mission for you today. We want to find the exact moment when our ancestors stopped just, existing as characters in the play of nature and actually stepped up into the director's chair.
The moment we took control.
Exactly. We are tracking the exact moment we started making history. And our guide for this journey is the foundational, just heavily researched text, The Penguin History of the World, 6th edition by J.M. Roberts and Odd Arnwestad.
Which, if you know history books, it's that iconic, thick book with the little penguin on the spine.
Yeah, the one that basically sits on the shelves of every serious history buff I know. So, okay, let's unpack this. What actually is history?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right, because if you look at the grand timeline, we aren't talking about the formation of the planet or the reign of the dinosaurs or anything like that.
No, we have to draw a very hard line right at the beginning here. History, at least as Roberts and Westad define it, is not just a chronological list of things that happen to a biological organism on planet Earth.
Like, dogs don't have histories.
Exactly. Dogs and cats do not have histories. A species of fern, it doesn't have a history.
It has a biological past, but not a history.
Right, because for hundreds of millions of years, the only way any living thing could change its relationship with the world was through this brutal, painfully slow process of genetic mutation.
A total roll of the dice.
A complete genetic lottery. If the temperature dropped, you either luckily possessed a random genetic mutation for thicker fur, or, well, your entire bloodline froze to death.
And that is the story of the Earth, but it is not history.
No. History begins at the precise moment that genetic lottery is broken by conscious choice.
By conscious choice. I love that distinction. It's the transition from instinct to inheritance. And I don't mean genetic inheritance, but like the inheritance of a good idea.
Yes, building a capital of experience.
Right. It's the ability to look at what the previous generation figured out and then retain it and actually improve upon it, rather than just sitting around waiting 100,000 years for your DNA to randomly adapt to a problem.
But to truly appreciate the sheer gravity of that moment, that moment of conscious choice, we really have to look at the crucible that forced our ancestors' hands.
Because we didn't just choose it out of nowhere.
No, we were forced into it. We have to go back to a time when our limits were terrifyingly narrow and we were entirely at the mercy of the natural world.
And the scale of time we are dealing with here is, honestly, it is hostile to the human brain.
It really is.
Like, we are wired to think in terms of our own lifespans, maybe our grandparents' lifespans, if we push it. We think a century is an absolute eternity.
100 years feels like forever to us.
But to grasp biological evolution, I want you, the listener, to just picture a giant cosmic clock. Let's compress time for a second.
This is a great analogy from the text.
Yeah, it really puts it in perspective. So, on this cosmic clock, a single century, 100 years of human triumph and tragedy, the entire span from, the Wright brothers taking flight to you holding a smartphone, that is just one single minute on this clock. 60 seconds.
Which is just a brilliant way to recalibrate our perspective, because if a century is a minute, the entire timeline of human experience shrinks down to a single afternoon.
Right, so if a century is a minute, Europeans began settling the Americas about 5 minutes ago. Like, your coffee is literally still hot from when that happened.
That's wild to think about.
And Christianity appeared on the global stage about 15 minutes before that.
20 minutes ago.
Yeah, 20 minutes ago. And the actual invention of writing, the very moment humans figured out how to record their thoughts on clay tablets, that happened less than an hour ago. All of recorded human history, every king, every empire, every war you've ever read about, it all fits comfortably into your lunch break on this clock.
But if we want to find the first recognizable, anatomically modern human beings, the people who look biologically identical to you and me hunting and gathering out in Western Europe, we have to look back 6 or 7 hours on that same clock.
So still within the same workday, essentially.
Yeah, still today. But to find the actual threshold, the very first traces of those remote, human-like ancestors whose exact contributions we are going to debate today, we have to go back 2 to 3 weeks on this clock.
Wait, 2 to 3 weeks?
2 to 3 weeks.
Where every single minute is a century.
Exactly. It is an unfathomable abyss of time. And for the vast majority of those 3 weeks, biological evolution was just inching forward in complete darkness, and it was driven by the absolute dictator of prehistoric life.
The climate.
The climate.
The great pacemaker.
Yeah.
Which is fascinating because we can actually zoom in on a pivotal transition about 65 million years ago.
Right, the end of the dinosaurs.
Exactly. Before this point, the world was essentially a massive warm greenhouse. There were no ice caps. Antarctica had just recently, torn away from Australia. The environment was perfect for these cold-blooded giant reptiles.
The dinosaurs.
Yeah, and they had zero need to internally regulate their body heat because the planet basically did it for them. It was a sauna.
And then the astronomical cycle just shifted abruptly. We know a catastrophic event, a massive asteroid impact, violently accelerated this. It choked the atmosphere with debris and basically blocked out the sun.
So the sauna gets unplugged.
Exactly. And the great reptiles, who were completely dependent on that external warmth, they were utterly incapable of adapting. They were just wiped out.
But that mass extinction, that plunging of global temperatures, it opened up an ecological vacuum, didn't it?
A massive one. And scurrying around the shadowy edges of this newly cold, terrifying world were these tiny, warm-blooded mammals.
Our remote relatives.
Right. They had been waiting in the wings for like 200 million years. And crucially, they could internally regulate their temperature, which meant they could actually survive the cold. They inherited the Earth.
Which perfectly sets the stage for the true anvil of human evolution, which is the Ice Ages. And I think when we hear the phrase Ice Age, we tend to picture like a cartoonish snowy winter.
Yeah, a lot of snowmen and mammoths sliding around.
Right. But we are talking about a geological era beginning roughly 4 million years ago, where the climate shifts became incredibly violent. And I use the word violent in strict geological terms, meaning these temperature swings took tens of thousands of years to play out.
It's slow violence, but it's absolute.
Over the last 3 million years, the planet endured somewhere between 17 and 19 distinct glaciations.
And the physical reality of a glaciation is just staggering. We are not talking about heavy snowfall here. We are talking about continental ice sheets, a mile or more thick, aggressively expanding southward.
A mile thick. That's over 5,000 feet of solid ice.
Right. An unimaginably heavy, grinding wall of solid ice creeping across the northern hemisphere. The sheer weight of it physically depressed the Earth's crust.
That is terrifying.
And this ice reached as far south as modern-day New York. Imagine standing on a mile-thick glacier looking down at where the Empire State Building would eventually be, knowing that ice will remain locked in place for the next 50,000 to 100,000 years.
Okay, wait, I'm struggling to reconcile this, though. You have a mile of ice crushing North America and Europe. It's literally scraping ecosystems right off the bedrock and causing a global freeze.
Yeah.
So how does a prolonged extinction-level freeze act as an incubator for human evolution? Shouldn't our ancestors have just frozen along with everything else?
It seems completely counterintuitive, I know, until you look at the atmospheric mechanics of a glaciation.
Okay, break that down for me.
So when millions of cubic miles of water are suddenly frozen into solid ice up in the northern hemisphere, that water is physically removed from the global water cycle.
Oh, because it's locked up as ice? It's not in the oceans anymore?
Exactly. It is no longer evaporating and falling as rain. So the direct effect in the north was crushing ice, but the secondary effect, the ripple effect, was massive global aridification.
Meaning the atmosphere simply dried out.
Completely. Thousands of miles away from the glaciers, down near the equator in Africa, the weather patterns were being violently disrupted.
Because it wasn't raining.
Right. The dense, ancient rainforests that carpeted the African continent were starved of rainfall. They began to desiccate, to thin out, and eventually shrink.
Wow.
And in the spaces where the dying forests receded, a new environment aggressively expanded. The open, dry grasslands, the savanna.
So the ice in New York essentially created the savanna in Africa.
That's exactly what happened.
That is an incredible ecological chain reaction. And it forces us to look closely at the creatures living in those African forests right when the trees started dying. Because all the most critical early stages of human evolution, they are geographically locked to Africa, far away from the ice itself.
Yes, the action is in Africa.
So to understand the leap to the savanna, we have to look at the survivors clinging to that shrinking canopy. We have to look at the prosimians.
So we trace our remote lineage back to early mammals that made a very strategic choice about 100 million years ago. While some mammals stayed on the forest floor, evolving into various rodents and things like that, another group fled upward. They took to the trees.
To get away from predators, mostly.
Exactly. It was an escape from ground-level predators and ground-level competition for food. Modern tree shrews actually give us a rough biological echo of what these remote ancestors looked like.
Like tiny, scurrying, highly anxious creatures.
Very anxious. But here's the thing about the canopy. It is not a safe haven. It is an utterly unforgiving three-dimensional obstacle course.
Right, because you are moving across branches 100 feet in the air.
And you're dealing with the sudden, terrifying danger of deep shade and dappled sunlight that acts as optical camouflage for predators like snakes and eagles, and branches that snap under your weight without warning.
Yeah, if you are a clumsy tree shrew, or if you misjudge a jump by a fraction of an inch, you fall. You die.
It's binary. The forest canopy was a brutal, hyper-efficient genetic filter that ruthlessly executed the uncoordinated.
Which forces a massive biological redesign, right?
A total redesign. Consider the hands. A ground-dwelling mammal like a dog or a rat, it uses its paws for traction. It pushes off the earth.
Right.
But up in the canopy, traction is useless. You need to grip. The evolutionary pressure heavily favored those with elongated digits and eventually the opposable thumb.
Because the biological mechanics of grasping a branch securely were the literal difference between life and death.
Exactly. And the sensory redesign is even more extreme than the hands.
Oh, this part blew my mind. Because a rat navigates the ground primarily by smell, right? It's sniffing the dirt for food or predators.
Sniffing the trail.
But if you are jumping between branches 100 feet up, sniffing the wind isn't going to tell you how far away the next branch is. Smell becomes a secondary, almost useless sense for navigation in the canopy.
Therefore, the architecture of the skull itself begins to change.
The face physically flattens out.
Yes. The snout recedes, reducing the olfactory cavity, and the eyes migrate from the sides of the head to the front.
Giving us that overlapping field of vision.
Exactly. That overlapping field grants three-dimensional stereoscopic sight. Suddenly, these primates can judge depth and distance with absolute precision.
What's fascinating here is how that physical shift from the nose to the eyes triggers a massive neurological revolution inside the brain.
Because the brain has to work harder.
Right. The brain has to process this incredibly dense stream of visual data to calculate depth, distance, and movement in real time. It requires a larger, vastly more complex neurological network.
And Roberts and Westad make this incredibly profound philosophical point about this exact moment.
Yeah, I wanted to talk about this.
They suggest that as this stereoscopic vision and grasping ability evolved, the creature's perception of reality fundamentally shifted.
Okay, walk me through that.
They argue that the world stopped being just a chaotic blur of, quote, undifferentiated sensations and became a world composed of distinct objects.
We really need to linger on the magnitude of that psychological crossing, because an undifferentiated sensation means you are existing in a state of pure reactionary instinct.
You're just a biological machine running a script.
Right. You feel heat, you move away.
Wow.
You smell a predator, you run. You see a flash of light, you blink. It's just input and reaction.
But the moment your brain can look at a branch, process its depth, recognize it as a discrete entity separate from the tree, and realize your hand can grasp it, you have conceptualized an object.
You realize the environment is made of pieces that can be interacted with. You cross the boundary from being a passive victim of your surroundings to an active manipulator of them.
And it is the absolute prerequisite for tools.
Right, because you cannot invent a hammer until your brain can isolate a stone from the ground and conceptualize it as a distinct object with utility.
Exactly. The mental and physical toolkit, the grasping hands, the 3D vision, the object-oriented brain, it was entirely forged by the brutal demands of the trees.
But, returning to our global climate change reaction, those trees were disappearing.
They were dying off.
Mm.
Between 25 and 30 million years ago, the African rainforest desiccated, leaving isolated patches of woods separated by vast, terrifying stretches of tall grass.
It's the ultimate game of musical chairs.
That's a great way to put it.
The biggest, strongest primates successfully defended their territories in the shrinking forests. They got the chairs. But the smaller, weaker ones, the losers of this territorial war, were physically pushed out to the edges.
They were exiled.
Exiled to the open savanna. A
Yeah.
terrifying landscape teeming with apex predators perfectly evolved for the tall grass. And to survive there, these exiled primates had to activate the ultimate evolutionary cheat code.
Walking on 2 feet. Bipedalism.
Bipedalism.
It is arguably the most significant locomotive shift in mammalian history.
Because it's not a smell change.
No, the transition from knuckle walking to upright bipedalism requires an exhaustive re-engineering of the entire skeleton. The spine has to curve to balance the torso over the hips.
You get that S-curve?
Right. And the pelvis must completely reshape itself from a long blade to a bowl shape just to support the internal organs vertically. The knees must lock, and the foot must develop an arch to absorb the shock of constant upright movement.
And for a long time, I assumed this massive, painful skeletal overhaul happened just so they could stand up tall and peer over the savanna grass to spot lions.
Which is a nice benefit, sure.
It is, but the biomechanical payoff is so much bigger than just being a periscope. When you lock your knees and balance your weight over your hips, you completely free your forelimbs from the burden of locomotion. You no longer need your hands to walk.
And an animal with free hands, hands already highly evolved in the canopy for precision grasping, mind you, is an animal that can now carry things.
Which changes the game entirely.
It seems simple, but think about the limitations of a quadruped. A lion kills a zebra, and the lion must gorge itself immediately, right there on the open plain, highly vulnerable to scavengers.
Because it can't carry the carcass away. It's walking on 4 legs.
Exactly. A chimpanzee might carry a piece of fruit a few yards in its mouth, or maybe hobble awkwardly with something in one hand, but its capacity to transport resources is minimal.
But a bipedal creature can forge into a dangerous area, locate a high-value resource like a patch of berries or a scavenged carcass, and physically withdraw it.
They can carry that resource miles away to a safer location.
They can also carry sticks or stones constantly, not just picking them up when a threat appears, but carrying them preemptively as weapons.
This capacity to carry completely alters the relationship with the environment. It leads us directly to a monumental fork in the hominin family tree.
The big divergence.
Yes, fossil records show that about 15 to 16 million years ago, a highly successful 40-pound primate species was widespread. But around 5 million years ago, the Great Divergence occurs.
One evolutionary branch doubles down on a certain lifestyle, leading eventually to modern great apes and chimpanzees.
And the other branch, the hominins, commits fully to this new, upright, carrying intensive lifestyle out on the plains.
And once your hands are permanently free from walking, that urge to manipulate objects we talked about earlier, it kicks into overdrive.
Oh, absolutely.
We are transitioning from the forest survivors to the true tool makers. We are entering the era of Australopithecus.
And the discoveries surrounding the Australopithecus genus, particularly since the 1970s, have completely upended our timeline.
They pushed everything way further back than we thought, right?
Yes, pushing the origins of hominin activity back millions of years. We are looking at fossils dating back over 4 million years, including the famous Lucy specimen found in Ethiopia.
Oh, Lucy. Everyone knows Lucy.
And incredibly intact skeletons found near Johannesburg dating to 3.5 million years ago.
What's staggering about these creatures is how anatomically advanced their lower halves were, while their upper halves remained quite primitive.
It's a real mishmash of traits.
It is. Their brains were barely larger than a chimpanzee's, and they had prominent ape-like jaws. But if you looked at their leg bones, their locked knees, and the shape of their feet, they were remarkably man-like.
They didn't just waddle, they could stride.
Right, they could run and carry loads over long distances with an energy efficiency that knuckle-walking apes simply couldn't match.
And when you look at the fossilized hands of the Australopithecines, you see a distinct flattening at the fingertips.
The flattened fingertips, why is that so important?
Because it is a biological signature. Flattened fingertips imply a heavy reliance on a fleshy, sensitive pad at the end of the finger, and that pad is essential for precision grip.
So they aren't just grabbing branches anymore.
No, it's the hand of a creature that spends a vast amount of time manipulating small objects with careful intent.
They were biologically primed for the next leap. And that leap arrives with a new genus that emerged alongside some of the later Australopithecines roughly 2 million years ago.
The genus Homo.
The genus Homo. The first traces of our direct lineage. And with them, we cross a monumental threshold. We find the first physical evidence of conscious creation.
This is a huge milestone.
Because it's not just picking up a rock to smash a nut, which a modern crow or chimpanzee can do. It's actually manufacturing an implement.
And the evidence for this lies in the dirt of Ethiopia, dating back about 2.5 million years. Archaeologists find river pebbles that have been systematically altered.
Systematically altered, meaning not just bumped around in the river.
Right. These aren't rocks broken by natural tumbling in a riverbed. They are pebbles that have been deliberately struck with another stone at precise angles to fracture the rock and flake off pieces.
Creating a jagged, razor-sharp edge.
Exactly. And the physics of flint knapping are incredibly complex. You have to understand the grain of the stone, calculate the angle of the strike, and apply the exact right amount of force.
It requires immense hand-eye coordination.
It really does. But the most revealing detail isn't just the sharp edge itself. It's the context.
Right, where they found them.
The specific types of stone used for these tools are often found miles away from where the finished tools are discovered.
Which proves intentionality. It wasn't a spontaneous act of finding a sharp rock nearby when an animal needed butchering. The hominin planned ahead.
They mapped it out.
They found a suitable vein of rock, carried the raw material miles across the savanna, manufactured the tool, and then carried the tool to where it was needed. They were conceptualizing a future need and preparing for it. Conscious creation.
And here's where it gets really interesting. Because you take that ability to conceptualize the future, you combine it with the ability to carry things, and you arrive at a specific location that changed everything.
The Olduvai Gorge.
The Olduvai Gorge in modern-day Tanzania. We are looking at a layer of sediment 1.9 million years old. And archaeologists uncover a semicircle of piled stones.
A semicircle of piled stones, which might not sound like much, but it is the first identified building in the history of the Earth.
A simple windbreak, a constructed shelter.
And scattered within and around this stone semicircle is a treasure trove of evidence. Countless stone tools, and crucially, smashed animal bones.
But not just chewed bones, heavy limb bones that have been deliberately shattered with stone hammers so the hominins could extract and eat the nutrient-dense, high-fat marrow inside.
If we pull back and look at the psychological weight of this stone circle, it is just staggering to me.
It changes all the rules.
Most animals are driven by immediate consumption. You catch it, you eat it. But these hominins were taking sharp stones, cutting meat off a scavenged carcass out on the dangerous plain, and then exerting immense psychological restraint.
They delayed their gratification.
They carried the heavy, bloody bones for miles back to the specific circle of stones to consume it. They invented the home base.
And the home base is a total revolution in biological survival. Think about why they needed to bring the food back in the first place.
Right, why not just eat it there?
The primary speculation from Roberts and Westad is that early hominin infants, lacking the grasping feet of their forest-dwelling ancestors, could no longer easily cling to their mother's fur while the mother hiked miles across the hot savanna foraging.
Because they're walking upright now.
Right. The infants had to be put down. They needed a safe, localized spot to stay.
So the windbreak isn't just a shelter from the breeze. It's a domestic anchor. It implies a profound division of labor.
A massive division of labor.
Females with highly dependent infants remain at the home base, perhaps foraging locally, while others, presumably the males, unburdened by nursing, venture out on long, dangerous expeditions to secure high-value protein and physically carry it back to provision the group.
It is the very hazy, nascent outline of the cooperative family unit.
And furthermore, the home base acts as a biological safety net.
Oh, this is crucial. In the wild, an injury is almost always a death sentence.
Yeah, if a solitary primate breaks a leg, it cannot forage, and it dies of dehydration or predation within days.
But a hominin with a broken leg can retreat to the stone windbreak.
The group will bring them water. The group will bring them smashed marrow bones. They can rest, heal, and survive.
By creating a home base, hominins were actively dulling the harsh edge of natural selection. They were building a social buffer against the brutal mechanics of evolution.
And that buffer, combined with the incredibly dense calories of animal marrow, it unlocked a phase of biological luxury.
Calories equal brain power.
Exactly. You have safety, you have high-fat protein, and your body can suddenly afford to fund the most energy-hungry organ in existence, the brain.
Which brings us face to face with the most successful hominin species to ever walk the earth before us, Homo erectus.
Homo erectus is just a titan of prehistory. In less than 2 million years after the divergence from the Australopithecines, the brain size of Homo erectus literally doubled. They boasted cranial capacities that approached the lower bounds of modern human variation. They possessed a massive, sophisticated neurological engine, and they used it to completely conquer the physical world.
And the map of their migration is awe-inspiring. They didn't just stay near the Rift Valley in Africa, they exploded out of Africa, walking across continents.
We find their fossils in Swanscombe, in Europe, in the Neander Valley.
We find them thousands of miles east in Chukwian and Lantian in China.
We even find their remains in Trinil, Indonesia. And that Indonesian survival is one of the most haunting facts of paleontology to me.
It's mind-blowing.
The fossil record indicates that isolated pockets of Homo erectus were still living on those islands as recently as 10,000 to 15,000 years ago.
It is basically yesterday.
That means they were still alive long after our own species, Homo sapiens, had already painted the caves of Lascaux and established deep roots across the globe. Homo erectus was an impossibly durable, adaptable genetic design.
And as they marched across the globe, they were utilizing that massive brain to engineer their environment to a degree never before seen.
They weren't just piling up loose stones for a windbreak anymore.
Yeah. No, the archaeological record shows Homo erectus constructing massive dwellings. Huts made of interwoven branches, some 50 feet long, featuring prepared floors paved with stone slabs or covered in animal skins.
50 feet long. They were essentially building prehistoric barracks.
And their material culture rapidly expanded alongside this. We find the earliest evidence of worked wood. They were carving wooden bowls to carry water or food, which requires hollowing out a solid mass.
That's a huge cognitive leap.
They were shaping the first wooden spears, hardening the tips to create lethal ranged weapons. But the absolute hallmark of Homo erectus intelligence, the artifact that defines their existence across continents, is the hand axe.
Ah, the hand axe. It is ubiquitous. You find them from South Africa to England to India. And despite the name, it wasn't attached to a wooden handle to chop down trees.
No, it was a hand tool.
It was a teardrop-shaped piece of stone, held in the palm of the hand, used primarily for heavy-duty butchery, skinning thick hides and dismembering the massive joints of large game.
But what is truly revolutionary about the hand axe is not its utility, but its morphology.
Its shape.
Yes. If you just need to slice through an elephant's hide, any jagged, razor-sharp flake of flint will do the job perfectly well.
Like the early tools we talked about.
Right. But Homo erectus did not stop at a sharp edge. They spent hours painstakingly chipping away at the stone to achieve a perfectly symmetrical bifacial teardrop shape. You find tens of thousands of these tools perfectly repeating the same highly regular geometric forms, ovals, triangles, ellipses.
Which is a massive conceptual leap. To craft a perfectly symmetrical teardrop hand axe, the napper must hold a vivid geometric template of the finished product in their mind's eye before they strike the first blow.
They are imposing a mental concept onto physical matter.
But the deeper question Roberts and Westad raise is, why? Why spend the immense extra calories and time to make a butchering tool perfectly symmetrical when a jagged rock works just as well?
It forces us to ask if we are witnessing the absolute dawn of the aesthetic sense.
Did Homo erectus look at a symmetrical stone and simply find it pleasing?
Did they possess a rudimentary appreciation for form, balance, and beauty? It suggests an internal life, a capacity to value something beyond its strict, brutal utility.
It is the faintest glimmer of art, hidden entirely within the casing of a survival tool. It's beautiful.
It really is.
But as is the brutal rule of the natural world, every biological advantage comes with an invoice.
Always.
And the invoice for that massive, beautiful, conceptualizing brain was almost insurmountable. We are arriving at the crux of our story, the point where the biology of our skulls fundamentally and permanently restructures human society.
The dilemma of the big brain.
The dilemma of the big brain, because it is the ultimate biomechanical bottleneck.
So the brain of an adult Homo erectus was huge, which meant the brain of a fetal Homo erectus was proportionately huge.
Right.
To allow a large-skulled infant to pass through the birth canal, the female pelvis must be extraordinarily wide.
Makes sense on paper.
But a bipedal creature relies on a narrow, bowl-shaped pelvis to keep its legs positioned under its center of gravity for efficient walking and running. If the pelvis gets too wide, the mechanics of bipedal striding completely break down.
The hip joints would just torque outwards, and the creature could no longer walk effectively.
Exactly. So evolution hit a structural brick wall. Nature couldn't widen the female pelvis any further without destroying the female's ability to walk.
The door couldn't get any bigger, so how do you get the massive brain out?
The only biological workaround was a drastic alteration of the gestation cycle. Evolution's solution was premature birth.
Compared to almost every other mammal, human infants are evicted from the womb incredibly early in their developmental cycle. They must be born while the skull is still small enough to squeeze through the rigid ring of the pelvis.
And the contrast with the rest of the animal kingdom is startling.
Oh, it's night and day. If you've ever seen a foal born, the horse drops to the ground, and within an hour, the foal is standing up.
Shaking but standing.
Within a few hours, it can run fast enough to keep up with the herd. It is born neurologically intact and physically capable. A human infant, by contrast, is born essentially as an external fetus.
It is utterly blind to its surroundings, entirely helpless, unable to support the weight of its own head for months, and entirely dependent on breast milk for years.
The period of human infancy and deep, helpless dependency is vastly extended compared to any other primate. Roberts and Wested actually dryly observed that this unique, biologically mandated period of tolerated immaturity just kept expanding throughout history.
Culminating today in the maintenance of young adults by their parents through years of higher education.
Right. But in the brutal reality of the Pleistocene epoch, having an infant that required years of intense, constant physical caring and nursing was a massive liability.
It radically rewrote the social contract.
Because the female hominin is now completely pinned down.
She is burdened with an infant that cannot cling to her back, that must be held constantly, and that drains her caloric reserves through years of nursing.
She cannot participate in the long, arduous, highly mobile foraging or hunting expeditions required to feed a large-brained body.
Therefore, the sheer survival of the species demanded a permanent, reliable partnership. The helpless infant necessitated a social structure where the male was fundamentally tied to the female and her offspring.
The male had to endure the exhausting, dangerous work of hunting big game and, crucially, returning to the home base to provision the specific female and child.
The shape of the female pelvis essentially mandated the creation of the cooperative provision nuclear family.
And to cement that nuclear family, hominin biology underwent another invisible but absolutely earth-shattering shift. It's a biological change that rarely gets talked about in history books, but Roberts and Wested highlight it as a cornerstone of human culture.
The complete loss of oestrus.
The loss of oestrus. This cannot be overstated.
In almost all other mammalian species, the female's sexual receptivity is strictly governed by the biological rhythm of ovulation, a period commonly known as being in heat or oestrus. During this narrow window, the female gives off potent chemical signals, and mating becomes a chaotic, instinctual, overriding frenzy for both sexes. It disrupts all normal behavior. For a few days, a baboon troop in oestrus is consumed entirely by aggressive, chaotic mating rituals.
And if we connect this chaotic biological reality to the bigger picture of our helpless premature infants, the conflict is immediately obvious.
The authors point out that if early female hominins were periodically seized by the violent, all-consuming disruption of oestrus, their highly dependent infants would have been abandoned.
Because a human infant needs daily, meticulous care. If the mother's and the group's instincts were suddenly hijacked for a week by an overwhelming biological imperative to mate, the infants would starve or be eaten.
The infant's extreme vulnerability exerted an immense selective pressure. The genetic strains that survived were the ones where the disruptive, cyclic frenzy of oestrus gradually faded away, replaced by continuous sexual receptivity.
And the cultural fallout from that singular biological change is immense. When sexual activity is no longer an automatic, biologically triggered frenzy strictly tied to reproduction, it becomes a conscious act. It becomes a matter of individual choice.
The authors literally point to this transition as the obscure, distant origin point for the concept of sexual love.
Mating shifts from being a seasonal reflex to a continuous mechanism for pair bonding. It cements the psychological and emotional ties of that nuclear family, the father, the mother, and the highly dependent offspring, into a stable, enduring unit.
And that stable unit immediately presented a new social hazard, prompting further cultural evolution.
Of course it did. Solving one problem creates another.
Always. The authors delve into fascinating speculation regarding the universal human taboo against incest.
Okay, lay this out for me.
Because human females were continuously sexually receptive, a unique tension emerged within these long-lasting family groups. You now had physically mature, highly sexed young males, sons and brothers, living in constant intimate proximity to sexually receptive females, their mothers and sisters, who were not in a narrow window of oestrus, but constantly available.
If those young males acted on their biological impulses within the family unit, the resulting sexual competition would violently tear apart the cooperation needed to survive.
The father would fight the son, the family would fracture.
So, to protect the fragile economic cooperation of the home base, early hominins had to develop deep psychological inhibitions.
The incest taboo wasn't necessarily born out of an understanding of genetics, but out of an absolute necessity to maintain social peace within the family so they could successfully hunt and gather.
It is a stunning cascade of cause and effect. A larger brain requires premature birth. Premature birth requires intense long-term childcare.
Intense childcare requires the elimination of disruptive estrus.
The elimination of oestrus creates continuous sexual pair bonding and the stable family.
And the stable family requires complex social rules and taboos to survive itself.
This is the exact moment biology gives birth to culture.
It is.
And with this tight-knit, cooperative family structure in place, heavily provisioned by a home base, Homo erectus was finally ready to harness the ultimate tool, a tool that felt like a violation of the natural order itself.
We are talking about the mastery of fire.
The mastery of fire. The timeline is hazy, but solid evidence of fire use in caves like Zucudian in China dates between 300,000 and 500,000 years ago.
And there are tantalizing ash deposits in South Africa that hint it might have been utilized over 1 million years ago.
But we must be precise here. These early hominins were almost certainly fire tenders, not fire makers. They did not know how to strike a spark.
Right. They had to opportunistically capture fire from a lightning strike, a natural gas seep, or a brush fire, and then meticulously feed it to keep it alive.
Which gives fire this terrifying magical aura. It's no wonder that almost every human culture possesses a mythology about a trickster or a hero, like Prometheus, who steals fire from the gods.
To possess fire was to possess a piece of the sun. It felt like an illicit superpower that humans were never meant to wield.
Because its impact was utterly transformative on every conceivable level. Economically, fire unlocked a massive vault of locked calories. Cooking fundamentally alters the chemistry of food.
It denatures tough proteins in meat, making them easily digestible.
It breaks down the toxic compounds in certain bitter roots and seeds, suddenly making vast swaths of previously poisonous plant life nutritious. The authors refer to this culinary exploration as the very first stirrings of the science of botany.
It also fundamentally altered their physical geography. Before fire, a deep cave was a death trap.
Pitch black.
It was pitch black and almost certainly the den of a cave bear or a saber-toothed cat. But a hominin with a burning branch can walk into that pitch black cave, drive the massive predator out in a panic, and claim the space.
Fire allowed them to push into freezing northern climates they biologically had no business inhabiting. It allowed them to harden the tips of their wooden spears in the embers, creating weaponry capable of piercing thick hides.
But the most profound transformation was psychological. Try to imagine the sheer, suffocating terror of the prehistoric night.
I can't even fathom it. When the sun went down, early hominins were completely blind, entirely vulnerable to predators, perfectly adapted to the dark.
Nightfall dictated a rigid biological curfew of silent, terrified hiding.
But the campfire broke that iron discipline. The flames pushed back the dark, creating a literal and psychological circle of safety.
The hearth. The authors describe the group sitting around the flames, suddenly aware of themselves as a small and meaningful unit against a chaotic and unfriendly background.
The campfire forces a physical intimacy. You are huddled together for warmth, looking across the flames at the faces of your family.
And crucially, the campfire creates something entirely unprecedented in the history of life on Earth: leisure.
Leisure time. Because the fire keeps the predators at bay and provides light, the day no longer ends at sunset. Hominins suddenly have hours of safe waking time where they are not actively foraging, not actively fleeing, and not sleeping.
They have time to sit, to reflect, to repair tools, and to interact.
And what do a group of hyper-intelligent cooperative primates do when they have hours of safe leisure time staring at each other across a fire? They try to communicate.
The complex vocalizations necessary for language were almost certainly incubated in the warmth of those evening hearths.
And they desperately needed that communication because during the day, they were attempting something that required military-level coordination, the hunting of big game.
This is the massive dietary shift of Homo erectus. The earlier Australopithecines were opportunistic scavengers, darting in to steal a leg from a carcass a lion left behind.
But by 300,000 years ago, hominins are actively, deliberately hunting the largest terrestrial mammals on Earth, elephants, woolly rhinoceroses, mammoths.
Which is an absurd proposition. You are a relatively small, soft-skinned biped armed with a sharpened stick. If you charge a mammoth, you die.
Right. To kill a mammoth, you have to outsmart it. The archaeological record shows they used the landscape against the animals.
They communicated complex plans to herd a massive, panicked, woolly rhino into a sticky, treacherous bog where its immense weight would trap it in the mud.
Or they organized lines of beaters to drive a herd of wild horses blindly over a steep cliff.
The sheer logistical complexity of that task is staggering. You have to predict the animal's movement, coordinate the actions of dozens of hunters over a large area, execute the kill without getting crushed, and then you have a dead mammoth in a bog.
You now had to systematically butcher tons of meat with stone hand axes and transport it miles back to the home base before the scent draws every pack of dire wolves in the county.
So what does this all mean for the trajectory of our evolution? It means the rules of the game have fundamentally changed.
To successfully orchestrate a mammoth drive, you do not rely on genetic instinct. A newly born hominin does not possess a mammoth hunting gene. They have to be taught.
Success relies entirely on experience.
This is the pivot. Evolution transfers its weight from genetic mutation to culture and tradition. The hominin group that survives a harsh winter is not necessarily the group with the thickest biological fat reserves. It is the group that remembers where the herds migrate when the snow falls.
It is the group that remembers which valley has the bog deep enough to track a rhino. Survival becomes an exercise in applied memory.
Which suddenly makes the elderly the most vital resource in the group. And when we say elderly in the Pleistocene, we are talking about an individual who has managed to survive the impossible odds of living to 40 years old.
In a purely brutal, animalistic society, a physically declining 40-year-old would be left behind.
But because these hominins possessed a home base, and because they could carry cooked meat back to the hearth, they could afford to support an elder who could no longer run fast enough to hunt.
They supported the elders because those elders were the living databanks of their society. They held the capital of experience.
They knew how to survive a drought because they had seen one 20 years ago. The physical weakness of the elder was vastly outweighed by the informational superiority of their memory.
But a databank is useless if you can't download the information. The elder has to be able to tell the young hunters how to organize the mammoth drive.
And this is where the authors theorize we find the deep, remote taproot of grammar. They didn't have modern language. They weren't reciting poetry, but they had to move beyond the instinctual animal scream.
An animal scream is a holistic, undifferentiated broadcast. A vervet monkey screeches, and it simply means danger.
But to coordinate a hunt, hominins had to begin breaking those holistic cries down into distinct, discrete sonic units. They needed a specific sound for mammoth, a different sound for bog, and another for spear.
And once you have distinct sounds that represent objects, linking right back to that stereoscopic vision in the trees, you can rearrange those sounds. You can combine mammoth and bog.
You have created the ability to pool experience. You can formulate a plan about an event that has not yet happened. You have unlocked abstract thought.
The acceleration from this point is astronomical. Over hundreds of thousands of years, these interlocking cultural feedback loops, the fire, the cooperative hunting, the rich marrow diets, the complex communication around the hearth, the veneration of the elders' memories, fed into a massive compounding expansion of mental capacity.
It is a breathtaking heritage. As Roberts and Wested conclude, when our own specific species, Homo sapiens, finally evolved from a later branch of these hominins in Africa, we did not start from scratch. We stepped onto a stage that had been meticulously built for us.
Whether we choose to look back at Homo erectus and grant them the title of fully human is almost a matter of semantics. They did the unimaginably heavy lifting.
They survived the ice ages. They perfected bipedalism. They crafted the hand axe. They built the home base. They endured the biological agony of the big brain. They harnessed fire. They laid the absolute foundation for every single thing we are today.
It's all built on their backs.
As we extinguish the campfire on this deep dive, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought. Roberts and Wested draw a stark contrast at the end of this journey. Today, in our hyper-connected modern world, our entire concept of survival and progress is based on looking forward.
We worship experiment, disruption, and analysis. We are constantly trying to discard the old way to invent the new thing.
But for millions of years of hominin history, for the vast, overwhelming majority of our time on this earth, survival depended entirely on looking backward. It depended on fierce adherence to tradition.
It depended on the deep, accumulated memories of the elders who knew exactly how the ancestors survived the frost.
It makes you wonder, in our desperate rush to constantly disrupt and analyze, have we completely outgrown the need for the living databanks of our society? How much of our modern social fabric still secretly relies on those deep, unwritten traditions forged around prehistoric fires? And what do we risk losing when we stop listening to the elders around our own modern hearths? We started out looking for a clean, definitive moment when history began. But history isn't a point on a timeline. It is the million tiny, courageous choices made by creatures fighting the dark. Thanks for joining us in the deep dive.